Hey guys, welcome to Hook with Anime. If you like the video, make sure to subscribe to my channel. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Give me all of you. An explosion lit the night sky. A blast so powerful, so radiant, that it seemed as though the sun had risen over Tokyo, despite it being dark moments earlier. Makima blinked. She stood from the couch, stopped reading a book. Her dogs, numerous in number, whined in protest. All 7 of them barked loudly. They encircled her, blocked her path, and refused to let her leave. It was as if they were protecting her, shielding her from something yet to come. She smiled softly, petting each of them gently. At her touch, the noise ceased. Her canines calmed down and finally let her move to a nearby window. Her suite was located at the 2nd floor of one of Tokyo's most luxurious buildings. Here, she could see everything. The city was grand, sprawled out before her. She overlooked countless humans as they walked below, each one like tiny ants on a planet so vast, going about their daily lives, most of them oblivious to the inner workings of the world, oblivious to the ones who pulled the strings from above. This time was different, however, Makima noted. She tilted her head curiously, crimson locks spilling over her beautiful face. For once, people stopped their various activities. Cars braked to a halt, creating traffic jams across the city. She discerned the voices of thousands, her sense of hearing enhanced by lower lifeforms across Tokyo. From mice, to birds, to certain pets, she could borrow their ears and listen in on almost any conversation. People whispered fearfully. Many stared at the night sky, perplexed, wondering what the source of that flash was. Makima followed suit, golden eyes drawn to the upper atmosphere. A glow seemed to cover the world. And suddenly, she could see it, a display of power unlike anything since the Gun Devil's rampage. A display of power that rivaled, perhaps even surpassed, the primal devils. Seconds later, a shockwave shook Tokyo, shook Japan and its surrounding nations. Every window in the city either cracked or shattered. She didn't flinch as shards of glass flew her way. In fact, she didn't blink, even when they pierced her skin, drawing blood. She took the brunt of the blast wave, protecting her dogs from injury. In a blink, her wounds were gone, healed almost instantly. Then, nonchalantly, she put on a suit, tie, and black overcoat, and leapt off the top floor of the building. She gently floated downward, defying gravity as she landed silently on a busy city street. Onlookers were shocked by her descent from above, but she ignored them. Her phone was already ringing, and dozens of messages were pouring in. Makima broke out into a sprint. She became a blur, invisible to the naked eye. Her coat billowed in the wind. She jumped, bounding into the air, landing on the roof of another building. She continued this pattern, leaping and running upon buildings until she was standing atop the tallest skyscraper in Tokyo. There, she looked up and witnessed a battle like no other. She could see it clearly. 3 figures. First, a giant purple monstrosity. Second, an equally monstrous golden apparition, which resembled a fox, equipped with 9 gorgeous flowing tails. What a sight it was! The last creature was more humanoid in appearance. It was a being with long white hair and pale skin and an eye on its forehead. Makima marveled. The battle raged, sending more shockwaves through the city. The clouds around Tokyo were darkening. Thunder crackled through the air. Lightning flashed brilliantly, racing across the night sky. Soon, rain began to fall. Fat drops of water. Each one seemed to glow as they descended, tinted orange by unfathomable amounts of energy. She was instantly drenched, water seeping into her suit, soaking every inch of her body. Yet she didn't move, didn't attempt to find shelter, didn't turn away from this battle, even when a stray bolt of lightning struck the roof of the building. Her eyes narrowed. She watched the clouds closely, noticed something odd. A sort of spatial distortion. It was almost as though the creatures fighting above were both physically present and not physically present at the same time. Like 2 separate worlds were colliding, merging, splitting, attracting each other, then repelling each other once again, akin to identical poles of a magnet. Her phones continued to buzz. The messages were ceaseless. So, finally, she answered one of the calls. It was the Prime Minister of Japan. As always, he sounded tense as he spoke to her, all too aware of the being he was interacting with. "Control Devil," he began tersely. "Prime Minister," she greeted calmly, a smirk on her lips. "We haven't spoken in quite some time. To what do I owe the honor?" He ignored her question. "I assume you're aware of the situation." She nodded, cool rain trailing down her hair. "Indeed. Explain it to me, then. Just what are we witnessing in Tokyo?" Makima hummed thoughtfully. How about this? First, tell me what you're seeing, Prime Minister. After all, I perceive things differently than your kind. So, my account might not be the same as yours. There was a sigh on the other end of the line. Fine. Let me take a closer look. There was shuffling in the background, whispering. His advisors, probably. They must have been seeing a live broadcast of the phenomenon. There's only a bright light. A ball of energy, glowing, floating above the city. So, he couldn't see the battle occurring in the stratosphere. Not surprising, really. Her senses were more highly attuned than most humans, to such a degree that they might as well be blind when compared to her. With the Prime Minister unaware of what was truly happening, Makima decided to keep this little aspect of the event a secret. I see the same thing, Prime Minister, she lied, then continued to watch the clashing of otherworldly beings. Just, a ball of light. She heard him sigh again. Then it's a natural phenomenon? Not related to a devil's ability? As far as I can tell, this is not the work of a devil, Makima replied. Many things happen in nature, things we cannot explain. Our only option is to protect the people of Tokyo and worry about the rest later. Very well. Continue your duty. The Prime Minister's voice grew distant as he barked orders to his subordinates. Since this isn't a devil hunter issue, I'll be sending a battalion of Defense Force soldiers to Tokyo, as a precautionary measure. A battalion, huh? He wasn't taking any chances, Makima shrugged. I will contact you if the situation changes. He ended the call. She shattered the burner phone to pieces, chucking it aside. Makima continued to look up, hands clasped behind her back in a dictatorial fashion. With each shockwave, she felt chills of excitement crawl up her spine. This power, this energy, it wasn't of their world, it was something else, something different, something indescribable. And she just had to have it, to control it. The rain fell harder now, yet she stayed in place. She received many more calls. This time, on her primary phone. The most pressing one came from the higher-ups. The leaders of public safety relayed instructions to her, as well as every devil hunter in the city. In short, they were to patrol the streets and keep an eye out for opportunistic devils, those that might use the fear and uncertainty of this event to wreak havoc. Makima frowned. She didn't want to stop watching just yet. The battle had grown fiercer. She could see a golden figure flying through the sky, engaging in close combat with the white-haired, horned assailant. She assumed he was male based on his physique, launched several energy projectiles at his opponent. Another blast of air and energy shook Tokyo to its core. Tearing her gaze away from the battle, Makima decided to get to work. She was a well-known devil hunter, after all. Thus, she had to keep up the appearance for now, lest she jeopardize her future plans. Shibuya, Tokyo, the Prime Minister had been right, in a way. Makima admitted this much. In truth, the phenomenon occurring in the skies of Tokyo wasn't caused by a devil. At least, not a devil she'd ever heard of. But it was, as predicted, causing a spike in devil activity throughout the city. Reports came flooding in after the initial explosion. Reports of supernatural creatures roaming the streets, attacking civilians, taking them hostage, even devouring them. Devils walked about. Some seemed to have a dazed look in their eyes, just staring up at the ball of light. Their rampage, though seemingly random, had a purpose. They were all headed to the center of Tokyo, headed to where that sphere of energy floated. Makima couldn't blame them. Even she felt drawn to the dazzling, warm, energetic phenomenon. She resisted this urge, however, focusing on killing devils that threatened the lives of those around her. This is fucking nuts, Tendo hissed from behind her. She was a tall woman, armed with a sleek, black katana. She was pretty, too, Makima mused, looking at her for once. She didn't normally remember human faces. Only their sense. However, Tendo's features were unique enough for Makima to take notice. The scar across her cheek and nose added character to her face. She wore the standard public safety uniform, consisting of a black suit, white shirt, and black tie. Agreed, Kuros replied. He was a shorter man, holding a katana as well. His scar mirrored Tendo's, but it was on the left side of his face. Tendo and Kuros had traveled all the way from Kyoto to aid in their efforts. They were very close, these two. Their souls bonded together by tragedy, by the gun devil's rampage. Makima gazed at them fondly, as an owner gazed upon her pets. Humans never ceased to fascinate her. Their drive, their willingness to fight that which was much greater than them. With a glance, she could tell that, truly, these two did not want to be public safety devil hunters. They did not wish to put their lives on the line on a daily basis. They would much rather be doing something else, pursuing other dreams. But pride made it impossible for them to stray from the path circumstance had laid for them. Killing the gun devil. This was the goal of nearly all young devil hunters. The terror that befell humanity 13 years ago was still fresh in their minds. Even if the task seemed impossible, countless people joined either civilian or public safety for the express goal of hastening the gun devil's death. Tendo and Kuros were no different. Humans, she thought, so fascinating. Watch out, Miss Makima. Tendo's cry reached her ears. Her subordinate began running, blade drawn. A devil was approaching, barreling through the street. Shaped like a crocodile, it knocked over power lines and sent civilians scurrying like ants. Tendo stood beside Makima, trying to aid her. She found it adorable. Please get back, Tendo, Makima soothed. Focus on helping civilians. Tendo hesitated but nodded. Makima held up a single finger. The crocodile-like devil was the size of a building. It rampaged mindlessly, kicking up cars, cracking the ground beneath its feet. She pointed at the creature. Bang! An invisible, telekinetic force erupted from her finger, striking the creature head-on. A single attack, and its skull exploded. Blood sprayed with much force, splattering buildings and people alike. She wiped a spot of crimson from her face. Good thing it was still raining. Water falling from the skies soon washed the blood away. Makima placed her hands in the pockets of her knee-length black coat, turning to her subordinates with an easy smile. Both Tendo and Kuros stood there, stunned. They glanced at her, then the deceased devil with a mixture of awe and envy. Like every human she'd encountered, that spark of inferiority glinted in her subordinates' eyes. To them, she was at a height they could never attain, at a peak too high to climb. Phone in the civilian hunters, she instructed. Have them clean up this mess. Kuros quickly snapped out of his stupor. Of course, ma'am. While he made the call, Tendo followed after her. Miss Makima? Hands still in her pockets, Makima turned with that ever-present smirk. Yes, Tendo? There it was again. Tendo was avoiding eye contact, looking everywhere else but at Makima. Feeling small. Inferior. What do you suspect that thing is? She was referring to the orb in the sky. Makima shrugged. I have no idea. Why you think it's a devil? One like the gun? Makima looked up. The sky was so wonderful, so dazzling. If I were to hazard a guess, I'd say no, this is unlike anything I've ever seen. Tendo looked sad, even though she tried to hide it, her calm, collected persona cracking. I really hope it's not a powerful devil. The world can't take another tragedy. As she spoke, Makima continued to stare upward, her eyes widened. It was subtle, but the ball of energy had become brighter. The rain fell harder as well. The lightning grew more luminous, and the sound of thunder pounded against her ears. Something's about to happen. She could feel it. Tendo, take Kuros and find shelter. Now. The sternness of her voice made Tendo stiffen, but she listened, dragging her buddy to the nearest building. Hands in her pockets, Makima watched calmly as the ball grew brighter, to the point where she couldn't see the beings within anymore. Then, suddenly, bolts of lightning flew from the orb. Purple electricity struck dozens of skyscrapers across the city. The largest one hit the very center of Tokyo, generating a cloud of smoke that rose into the sky. Finally, one last bolt, orange in color, struck a forest outside the city. Makima's gaze narrowed, eyes following the final lightning strike. When it was over, that orb of energy was no longer there. It had vanished without a trace, the defect of equality. A young man awoke to darkness, and dirt, and trees, and rain, pouring, pounding rain. He sucked in a sharp breath. The smell of nature reached his senses, bringing with it a feeling he could not describe, a familiar feeling. One that reminded him of home. For a time, he laid still. Staring. Just staring at angry clouds as they spewed water from above. He was also under a tree, under its large sheltering branches. When he finally tried to move, pain tingled through his entire body. So deep, so visceral was the pain that he was left breathless, panting, and heaving as waves of discomfort washed over him. A grunt escaped his lips. From head to toe, agony was there to greet. Like an old friend, it remained with him, held him, providing no respite. What happened to me? He was soaking wet. His clothes were torn to shreds, and there was blood. A lot of blood. He craned his neck upward in an attempt to assess his physical state. Cuts and lacerations lined his body, etched deeply into his skin. Agony pulsed in his chest specifically. His skull pounded fiercely, and he could scarcely feel his left arm. Helpless, he remained motionless, wondering why everything felt so wrong. Not only was he in a strange place, covered with wounds, and alone, but he also couldn't remember. He couldn't remember anything. Not what he'd been doing before. Not where he was. He couldn't even remember who he was. It was a strange feeling. Not knowing anything. Not knowing yourself, even. He was aware of himself as a unique entity, as a human being with thoughts and feelings. But internally, he had little idea about himself. Little idea of where his story began and where it was now. Shit. He closed his eyes, opening them a moment later. Fine, then. He wouldn't let that little setback get him down. He'd start with something simple. Like, a name. Now, what was his name? He racked his brain for ideas, drawing upon fractured memories that were barely within reach. Kaguya? No, that wasn't it. An S? No, an N. Yeah, that was it. After minutes of brainstorming, it came to him, suddenly and without warning. Naruto, he exclaimed, before wincing in pain. That was it. That was his name. He grinned. It just felt so right. He couldn't put his finger on how exactly he knew, but he did. Afterwards, the surname, Uzumaki, returned to him as well, and for the first time, he felt a burst of happiness swell in his chest. Great, Naruto whispered with relief. We're getting somewhere, at least. Now, he had to figure out where he was, and what he was going to do about being out here, exposed to the elements. The sound of splashing puddles made him freeze. Then, a voice. Oh. Thank goodness, you're awake. It came from behind him. He arched a brow. It was soft, high-pitched, distinctly female. She was wearing a raincoat, holding a device in her hand. The woman was young, average height, sporting short bluish-black hair that fell just below her ears. Someone else was there, bringing up the rear. It was a male, young as well. He also had a raincoat, and was huffing with exertion. Holy shit, you really did find someone, the male said, catching his breath. The woman shot him a look. Why would I be lying? He rubbed his dark hair sheepishly. Sorry. With all the rain and that strange light in the sky, I thought no one would be crazy enough to be out here practically naked. Well, we're crazy enough to be out here, she responded. The young woman knelt beside him, smiled gently. But we actually came prepared, and we're filming our movie. Pretty good reason to be out here, her partner argued back. Then he frowned. He looks really hurt. The woman leaned close, shined a light in his face. Hi there, are you okay? Naruto groaned, closing his eyes. I'm not sure. I think you were struck by lightning, she explained. Can you move? He tried to do so once more, finding that the pain was hardly any better. Barely. Don't try to get up, the young man soothed. He'd finally realized the gravity of the situation. I'm calling for help. This spot's supposed to be safe from devils. You're lucky you weren't injured outside of the area. We got lots of public safety officers here. Public safety. He echoed. After making a call, the man sat down beside him. He pulled out a waterproof tarp from the lady's bag, draped it over Naruto's body, then inspected him as well. You sure he was struck by lightning, Eri? Asked the young man, eyes wide. Looks more like he was mauled by a bear. There's a lot of blood. I'm not sure. I saw the lightning strike. It was large, golden. Very loud. Eri tried to explain it. She seemed to also notice the severity of his wounds, growing pale. Yuta. Hey, the male, Yuta, said softly. What's your name? Naruto, I think. Why were they looking at him like he was going to die? Yuta moved closer. Naruto, huh? Wait, you think? Yeah, he answered. I'm having trouble remembering certain things. Yuta nodded, then placed a cloth on Naruto's chest, adding pressure to a nasty wound that would not stop bleeding. Eri rubbed his bloodied hair and tried to call for help on her device once more. Do you have any family? She inquired gently. She held his hand. Anyone we can reach out to? Again, that look in their eyes. Afraid. Uncertain. Acting like he wouldn't make it. Like hell he wouldn't. Not after just waking up, and certainly not before he discovered who he was, who he used to be. A burst of warmth flooded his body, responding to his emotional state. It surged from his stomach. The warmth, now a fire, headed to his chest, burning, his wounds hissing with steam. Yuta and Eri seemed shocked, almost jumping back. And then, a sudden, mighty wind blew, knocking Naruto away from the tree. The massive gale made his eyes tear up, blinding him momentarily. But when he could finally see, he wasn't quite sure what he was looking at. A large, mutated bird descended from above, beating its wings with such ferocity that the tree behind him was torn from its roots. The lumbering trunk was ripped from the ground, where it collapsed with a heavy thud. Shit. A devil? Yuta yelled, stumbling toward Eri. He tried to pick her from the muddy ground, but another burst of wind threw both of them off their feet. The being in question, a devil, they'd called it, landed, splashing water and dirt into the air. Naruto stared, blinking. What the hell was this thing? It was a bird, yet many, many times larger, and it looked hideous, like a vulture, but much more monstrous. It didn't hesitate, lunging at Yuta and Eri with horrible talons. They acted quickly, ducked as it sailed overhead, as it rammed into a dozen trees, knocking them down in the process. The black-feathered vulture screeched. It had been too eager, too careless, and gotten its beak lodged in the mud. Come back here, humans, the creature bellowed, freeing itself from the ground. It talks. Naruto wouldn't say he was surprised, though. Seeing as he had no frame of reference for what was normal, he took things in stride. No matter how bizarre. Yuta and Eri looked as though they wanted to leave, wanted to escape this nightmare that had befallen them. But they paused. They turned to him. We can't just leave, Eri exclaimed fearfully. Naruto still needs our help. Yuta shut his eyes tightly. Damn it. He looked around, scared out of his mind. Go ahead. I'll carry him. Naruto was stunned. He gazed at them, studying their faces with amazement. Didn't they expect him to eventually die from his injuries? Yet, here they were, still willing to help, putting their lives at risk for the sake of a stranger. Their kindness touched his heart. It left a profound impact on him in that moment. Instead of escaping, Eri helped Yuta hoist Naruto onto his back. I told you to run, he hissed, glaring. Eri glared right back. I'm not leaving you behind. The ground shuddered as the vulture came barreling toward them. They ran like hell. As fast as they could. Rain pelted Naruto's face, soaking him to the bone. Lightning flashed across the night sky, striking trees, even starting a small fire, which was promptly extinguished. Yuta panted. Eri stayed by his side. Their display of courage, their perseverance in such a situation, triggered memories. Images of a past he no longer remembered. He saw many things. Many strange, confusing things. He glimpsed a war. Mirrors of ice. Death. Destruction. Faces he could not recall. A spear of bone ripping through his chest. Naruto gasped, choking on blood. His wound hurt terribly. His chest burned, and he screamed. Cried to the heavens. The steam returned, rising from a hole near his sternum. Eri turned, worry coloring her face. The vulture was upon them, beating massive wings. A gust of air nearly knocked the duo off their feet. Feathers flew from the creature like bullets. They moved fast, dozens of them, destroying trees in the distance. One feather struck Yuta in the leg, tore a piece of flesh from his calf. He cried out, collapsing in the mud. Naruto was flung from his back, sliding against dirt and water. Eri fell as well, arm bleeding profusely. The vulture came to a halt, chuckling. Food, 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 food. It screeched, drool spilling from its beak. Eri crawled to Yuta, who was panting, trying to get up. He looked at her. She looked at him. Time slowed to a crawl. They hugged, held each other in that moment. Held each other amid pouring rain. Amid flashing lightning and howling winds and certain death, and Naruto thought that this was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. He gritted his teeth, fists balling in the mud. He fought against the agony, eyes narrowed with rage. There was no way in hell he'd let these two die, especially after risking their lives for him. A complete stranger. Fuck no, the devil sprang forward, jaws agape, revealing 2 rows of razor-sharp teeth. A familiar power surged in Naruto, flowing from his stomach, empowering every cell in his body. Mud splashed loudly. He blurred forward, punched the ugly piece of shit's jaw, broke its beak, and sent it crashing through a nearby tree. Panting, he held onto his chest. The wound was healing, very, very slowly, but healing, nonetheless. And Naruto? He heard Eri's voice, the shock, the amazement. Naruto turned, only grinned. He stood in front of them, protectively. The vulture recovered, blood leaking from its wrecked maw. It stared him down, fury burning in its beady eyes. Fool! You dare strike me! The devil howled, readied itself for another attack. It fluttered its wings, sending a hail of razor-sharp feathers flying their way. In truth, Naruto didn't know how he did it, neither did he care. The action was almost like a reflex to him, practiced for years, years that he no longer remembered. The moment the creature's attack came, he raised both hands, felt that same surge of energy rising from his stomach. A wall of dense, spinning water rose to meet the feathers, supplied by pouring rain. It was almost instant, stopping the projectiles from reaching, halting them in their tracks. The water wall then collapsed, splashing him, splashing Eri and Yuta. Despite the situation, Naruto chuckled with glee. He could control water. Actual, fucking water. The high of the moment gave him confidence. On reflex, he reached into the holster of his pants, grabbed a knife, a kunai, and broke into a sprint. A dim glow surrounded the blade. Adrenaline masked the pain. He leapt up, high above the devil, skewering its eye as he landed. It screamed in agony, trying to shake Naruto off, to no avail. He stabbed its other eye and blinded it. The creature rammed into trees, broke branches in an attempt to toss him asunder. Naruto held fast. He stabbed and stabbed and stabbed, piercing deep into the devil's thick hide. In one swift motion, he sliced its neck in a long arch, effectively slitting its throat. The vulture gurgled and slammed into more trees. Naruto gritted his teeth, taking the brunt of the force, blood bubbling up his throat. Yet he held on, kept his kunai in place. In desperation, the devil took to the skies, beating its great wings. They flew upward, so high that the forest now seemed like tufts of grass, so high he thought he could touch dark, angry clouds. Though in pain, Naruto marveled at a city in the distance. It was massive, full of towering buildings and bright, twinkling lights. He gritted his teeth, found that energy one more time. This time, the wind obeyed, controlled by his will. Again, on reflex, he didn't truly know what he was doing. Naruto formed a hand sign, and a blade of compressed air descended like a guillotine, slicing the devil's head off. You filthy Huma-ak. The words stopped in its throat, head separated from body. It died instantly. And so, victorious, Naruto let go. He fell. The dark, unforgiving ground raced to greet him. This sucks, he thought. Just when he'd started to discover some things about himself, he'd end up dying, injured, in pain, and plummeting from the clouds. He smiled despite the agony, despite the fear as the earth loomed ever closer. At least he could protect Yuta and Eri, the first people he'd ever met. At least he did something worthwhile, something genuinely good. The air was strangely gentle as he fell, peaceful. Utterly exhausted, he closed his eyes and let himself be held by it, let himself be carried and taken. If the fall didn't kill him, his injuries were sure to do it. He accepted it, strangely enough, accepted the fact that his life, though short-lived, was about to end. Or so he thought. Naruto felt something mid-fall, something like gentle hands. They wrapped around him, slowing his descent to earth. This person, they were warm. They were soft. And they smelt good. Amazing, even. Like flowers and rain and sunshine. With a hint of blood. They held him and stopped the fall. He didn't open his eyes. Not yet. He let himself be held, let himself be safe in this person's care, in spite of the rain and the pain and the freezing wind. They were floating now, suspended in midair. Naruto finally opened his eyes. He looked up, saw the most enchanting set of eyes. They were golden. They seemed to glow, covered with two strange rings around each pupil. Then he noticed her hair, fiery red. Two crimson bangs caressed her cheeks, tossed about by the wind. Her face was beautiful. Simply beautiful. Perfect by all accounts. She was smiling, too. It was a smirk, a confident twitch of the lips. She looked at him curiously, head tilted slightly. She was dressed in a suit and tie, not concerned by his injured, bloodied state. The woman held him steady, one arm under his back, the other under his legs. They floated down until the forest no longer seemed small and the trees were as large as they were supposed to be. A glowing, ethereal chain, one attached to her abdomen, flickered out of existence when they landed. She remained quiet. Howling wind and pouring rain filled his ears. Naruto looked up, studied her face. She'd taken on a more inquisitive look. She glanced around, spotting the carcass of that bird-like devil. You killed it, she stated. Fascination, rather than surprise, tinted her voice. Naruto liked her voice. Yeah, she looked at him, smiled. Even while so injured? He wanted to laugh, but even the thought made him wince. I guess so, he whispered. I don't really know how I did it. You don't? I don't. She seemed even more interested. What is your name? Naruto, he answered. I think so, at least. The woman arched a slender brow, but nodded. I'm Makima. Makima. He thought. His hero. An angel. Another kind person, like Eri and Yuta. She set him down so he could stand. He hardly could, wobbling on his feet. She steadied him with those slender, yet powerful arms. They were close, so close he could feel her breath against his cheek. Who are you, Naruto? Her voice sent chills down his spine. I don't remember, he answered honestly. No use lying. Maybe she could help him remember. Help him get better. Is that so? Uh-huh, he whispered tiredly. She smiled that same gorgeous, all-knowing smile. If that's the case, then let me be the first to tell you this. She leaned closer, whispered, Welcome to our world, Naruto. Our world? What did she mean by that? His weight fully against her body, he struggled to keep conscious. She ran her fingers through his hair, softly, gently. She massaged his scalp in little, soothing circles. I'll help you. Don't worry about a thing, she reassured. As long as you listen to me, everything will be okay. Naruto wanted to sleep, to lay down and close his eyes. He could barely process her words. He could hardly comprehend what she was saying. He remembered Eri and Yuta in that moment, remembered their display of affection for one another. Naruto wanted to thank Makima in a way that meant something, a way he felt was beautiful. He looked at her. She gazed at him, blinked curiously. Naruto reached forward. He wrapped his arms around her, held her as tightly as he could, rested his face in the nook of her neck. Thank you. For saving me. Makima stiffened, froze against his touch. Her eyes widened, then quickly reverted to their usual size. Controlled. Unfazed. Like she always was. She returned his hug and wrapped her arms around his waist. She pulled him into her. So close that he could feel her soft bosom against his own. The rain continued to fall, and their clothes were soaked beyond measure. They were practically skin against skin. Body against body. As long as you listen to me, you'll be fine, Makima repeated, eyes glowing hypnotically, a glint in her amber gaze. Her breath tickled his ear. Well, Naruto. What do you say? Will you give me all of you? Will you give me the entirety of your being? He lost consciousness, her final words echoing in his mind. Oh, yeah, Naruto mused. He had to thank Eri and Yuta as well. Chapter 2 Lots of hugs. The truly necessary evils are always kept collared and controlled by the state. Makima darkness gazed out over the vast expanse of hell. It was shaking. Everything was shaking. Trembling. Tremoring. Bolts of lightning flashed above him, and the doors of hell were left rattling in the wind. Countless devils, roused by the sudden noise, fled in all directions. It was chaos, mayhem. Some emerged from the ground. Some descended from above. Some simply stood there, entranced by the strangeness of it all, by the uncertainty that crackled through the air. Hell was, quite frankly, ablaze with activity, not unlike the times when Pachita had wreaked havoc across the home of all devils, cutting hundreds down with his buzzing, slicing chainsaws. Interesting, Darkness spoke. His voice was but a whisper, yet rife with thunderous power. Opening, closing, the doors of hell slammed with such force that its eerie sounds echoed through every corner of this hidden, inaccessible dimension. Darkness walked. And all activity ceased. With each step, wandering devils froze. Then they fell to their knees as he passed them by. Out of fear, out of reverence, out of malice, or out of jealousy, each devil's motive was unclear, known only to themselves. Yet, they still bowed before him, still showed him the respect he was due as a primal entity. Darkness watched with multiple eyes, observing his surroundings with mild intrigue. Hell was bathed in a mystic glow, a sort of light that was unnatural, a light not affected by his abilities. Because everywhere he went, blackness followed. He was clothed in it, bathed in it. Like the endless void of space, anything caught within his shadow was swallowed up, never to return. A stray devil suddenly flew past his line of sight, disrespecting him by not paying penance. It was a devil with dark, metallic wings and long, silver hair. A child. A baby devil. Recently born in hell, by the feel of things. She was ignorant, it seemed, unaware of the hierarchy that existed here. In time, she would learn. She would realize that one could not just do as they pleased in the presence of a primal being. Without remorse, darkness pointed a single finger. The winged devil died, instantly. It was a gruesome display. Once beautiful, the devil exploded, limbs flying, organs bursting, blood raining. He walked over the corpse as she faded from existence. Soon, she would be reborn on Earth, as all devils who died in hell were. By now, space was shifting, distorting itself. Every door above opened, and darkness peered into the void. He saw something. Something that intrigued him to such a degree that he could do nothing but watch. Not out of fear or alarm, but out of a desire to know, to understand, and to comprehend. He witnessed the battle clearly. It was a war, more accurately. Three beings clashed in a way he and the other primal devils often did, causing great cataclysm and unparalleled destruction across a barren world. Even from a distant plane of existence, their power could be felt, and it affected hell so profoundly that grand displays of lightning covered the skies above, bathing the land in a bright, luminous aura. A stray bolt raced toward him. Darkness took the blast without flinching. The devils behind him weren't so lucky. They were vaporized by purple lightning, too weak to accommodate such energy. At first, he thought these three were primals, just like him, are like death. But upon closer inspection, he realized that they weren't devils to begin with. They felt more human than anything else. Fascinating, he repeated, gaze locking on a golden figure specifically, as he fell from the sky and to the earth in a spectacular bolt of lightning. Oh, how the universe, how existence, never ceased to satiate his boundless curiosity. Spring, 1997. The afternoon sun burned from above, bathing the city in a glinting, soporific glow, a dreamlike radiance that dulled the senses and eased the mind. Despite the time of day, when activity was normally at its peak, few people traversed the winding streets. Due to government orders, most were in their homes, either with their families or friends, ordered to take refuge in case of another sudden swarm of dangerous devils. Only those with special permission, such as healthcare workers, or public safety devil hunters, were permitted to come and go as they saw fit. In contrast, however, numerous Defense Force soldiers patrolled the streets. Armed to the teeth and given jurisdiction by the Prime Minister himself, they aided public safety and local police in keeping the peace, as well as watching out for any stray devils roaming hidden corners, abandoned buildings, or empty alleys. All things considered, Tokyo wasn't as damaged as initially believed. After the events of 3 days ago, the destruction had mostly been relegated to cracked or shattered windows and broken concrete in the city streets. Makima was impressed. Things seemed far worse in the moment. She surveyed the damage with keen eyes. Inside a car, she leaned back in the passenger's seat. The window was down, and the cool air of spring fluttered through her red hair. It had been quiet since then, but she'd hardly had a chance to breathe. Meeting after meeting. Phone call after phone call. This had been her life for the past 72 hours. She stretched her arms, taking a sip of steaming coffee. "We'll be arriving shortly, Miss Makima," Tendo announced. The tall woman was driving. She glanced at Makima from the rear-view mirror. "Thank you, Tendo." She smiled. "I don't really enjoy talking to the higher-ups, so I need to ready myself for their questions. Who knows what those old men are going to ask me?" Tendo glanced away when Makima caught her gaze. Her grip around the steering wheel tightened. I'm sure you'll define, ma'am," Tendo said softly, albeit stiffly. "Can't be any harder than taking down devils with a single attack." Her form of a compliment. Makima nodded absently, continued to display nothing but strength and assurance in herself. "That's where you're wrong, Tendo," she thought. The higher-ups knew almost everything about her. She was under the state, the government, for the greater good of Japan and, by extension, humanity. If she tried to lie, they might see right through it. She could always control them, could always speak the words and force them to be subservient to her, but she wasn't aware of the devils they were contracted with. For all Makima knew, they could be connected to beings like pain, or darkness, or death. Devils even she couldn't manipulate, devils that were stronger than her. If she used her power on the higher-ups, things could backfire, resulting in her plans being jeopardized, and suspicion being placed on her. For all her strength, she was not omnipotent. She had to be stern, crafty. She had to weave the best answers to their questions, to ensure her grip over the future did not slip away. Makima leaned back in her chair, buttoned her suit and straightened her tie. After this meeting, she would be visiting Naruto at the hospital to check on his condition. Her newest pawn, the blonde that fell from the sky, had been in a coma for the last 3 days, the wound in his chest so gruesome, even the best doctor in Tokyo couldn't understand it. Even she couldn't understand it, couldn't understand him. He was human, of course. All of her senses told her this. He felt human, smelt human. Yet his physical capabilities, even while on the verge of death, was on par with Guangxi, the first devil hunter. It was interesting, to say the least. Makima had many theories on the matter. What she'd seen in the sky that day, the merging and scattering of worlds, wasn't something she'd consider surprising. After all, hell, her place of birth, was located in a different dimension, and was not accessible by normal means, either. Logically speaking, if such a place as hell existed separately from the physical world, then other places, some like Earth, others different, could also exist as well. The possibilities were endless, and she, being a highly curious devil, wished to explore this new reality. Unbidden, the memory of their first encounter returned. His scent still lingered in her mind. It was unique, an otherworldly scent. There'd also been something else, a sort of aura that surrounded him, emanating from the depths of his being. She shivered at the thought, an involuntary chill crawling down her spine. The memory of his arms around her suddenly blazed to life. His arms around her neck. His body against hers. His breath against her ear as he thanked her. Why had that felt so pleasant? Now that Makima thought about it, had she ever been hugged before? Even as a child, newly reborn on Earth, none of the government officials had so much as shown her an ounce of affection. It was a confusing feeling, to say the least, but not terrible. "We're here, ma'am," Tendo announced, snapping Makima from her thoughts. The car slowed to a halt in front of a large building. Devil Hunter headquarters stood starkly against a silent city. Unlike the streets of Tokyo, activity here was ceaseless. Devil Hunters came and went, some in pairs, some alone. Tendo parked at the front, in a lot overlooking the elegant building. It was beautiful, a unique architectural structure with multiple stories, a well-kept garden, and various flags waving in the wind. "This shouldn't take long, Tendo," Makima stated. "I'll call you when I'm finished." Tendo nodded once. She unlocked the doors, and after that? "We'll be heading to the hospital," she answered, earning a nod from the taller woman. Makima opened the door and headed down a straight path. As she moved, several devil hunters paused, staring after her. Some nodded in respect, greeting her with nervous smiles. Others froze as she walked by. They placed her on a pedestal, yet kept themselves at arm's length. She entered the building, greeted more hunters, and headed to the highest floor. There, Kishibe was waiting. She recognized his scent even before she saw him. As always, she took a moment to study his face, to remember his features, eyes trailing the long scar that ran from his lip to the end of his jaw. He was an older man. Handsome, yet clearly aging. His graying hair glinted beneath the bright lights. His angular face, peppered with stubble, seemed weary with fatigue. "You're here," Makima stated, unsurprised. Kishibe shrugged. "Whenever there's something to clean up, you bet I'll be here." He crossed his arms. "I'm assuming they called you in?" She nodded once. Her eyes focused on the great double doors. Behind, 5 men waited for her to enter. What did they ask about? Kishibe rubbed the stiffness from his neck. "Oh, the usual questions whenever shit hits the fan. Nothing notable." He was lying. Makima could see it clearly. She looked into his eyes, tried to understand his angle. Kishibe didn't trust her. He never had. It was plain as day on his face. No matter. He was just another pawn in her game. Another piece to be moved around until she deemed him unfit to continue playing on the board. She tilted her head. "Then I have nothing to worry about?" He chuckled. "You? Worried? I didn't know you could feel an emotion so trivial." Her eyes narrowed, yet she smiled. "Even the strong feel fear, Kishibe," she said cryptically. "I hear your old partner has been making moves in China. Quite a bit of eyes are on her again. Perhaps I should place my attention on her as well? After all, she is a threat to national security." Kishibe remained silent, trying to act unfazed. Yet that spark of emotion, invisible to most, was clear as day to her. "Why would I care about what Guangxi's doing? I haven't seen her in years." He waved her off nonchalantly, beginning to walk away. "If anything, I'd be more concerned with what happened 3 days ago." "Indeed," Makima said, asking, "Any ideas as to what that was?" Kishibe paused. "I don't." She watched him leave, smirking. Just another pawn, Makima thought. She opened the doors. Makima stood before them. All 5 of them. They were older men, dressed in fine suits. Seated at a long table, they scrutinized her with unflinching gazes. Behind them, Many great windows rose, letting in rays of light so bright, it seemed to make them glow. She clasped her hands behind her back. Confidently, she met their eyes. She was used to this. Used to being watched, questioned, tested. She abided the chain of command. She feared no one, yet respected the wishes of the higher-ups, at least for now, until she was done playing this role. An older man with gray hair and glasses looked up from a stack of papers. It seems that Japan wasn't the only nation involved in this latest incident, he drawled. Every country, from China, to India, to the United States, report similar occurrences. He read through the paper once more. Darkening skies. Flashes of lightning. Shockwaves and shattered windows. Few causalities, though, surprisingly. Another man, dark-haired and gentle, leaned forward. There's also the sudden uptick of devil activity in response to this incident. The surge, as we're calling it, occurred just moments after that flash appeared in the sky. Numerous devils of a weaker to middle-strength caliber made themselves visible, acting atypically. He pinned her with a soft gaze. You were one of the first on the scene during the incident, Makima. Was there anything worth noting? Anything you saw? Feet apart, hands clasped behind her, she considered their words. No, she answered in a measured tone. The phenomenon occurred while I was home. I simply did what any other devil hunter would do and decided to investigate the situation. All the eyewitness accounts and videos are consistent with my own. I saw nothing but a flash, a ball of light in the sky. The man with glasses placed the papers down. Even your keen eyes didn't see anything, he replied, sighing. Our world grows more uncertain by the day, it seems. The gun devil plunged us into an era of fear and chaos, another higher-up said. This event is quite reminiscent of that day. I predict that the fear of devils will only continue to rise, creating even stronger entities in the future. And we will face such entities head-on, Makima said calmly, confidently. Don't forget that I am here, that devil hunters are here to protect Japan. The man with dark hair laughed softly. Of course, he said wistfully. For a moment, he looked at her strangely. Almost, regretfully. His eyes glinted with emotion. Why was he looking at her like that? Nevertheless, he continued. We mustn't let our enemies use this as an opportunity to threaten our security. Japan was hit the hardest, and the Soviets are always in the mood for provoking us. Then we must project an air of strength, Makima suggested. She swept her gaze past all 5 men. Have you given thought to the idea I proposed? A special division composed of devils and fiends. Yes, we've considered it, said the white-haired man. We wanted to give it more thought. However, due to recent events, I believe putting more devils and fiends in our arsenal might be what the future is pointing to. After all, there's been rumors circulating about the Soviets drafting devils into their armies. So, we're at an understanding? She inquired. Yes, the gentle-voiced man said. We'll begin the process in several weeks. You're already acquainted with the subjects, so I'm sure they will listen to your commands. She nodded. Of course, and if they do not comply, I will kill them myself. No need to worry. Good, very good, the white-haired man said. He glanced at his paper once more. Another thing, Makima. I see that a notable amount of our funds has gone to Okabadera Hospital. Says here that a young man is being treated for severe injuries after, as eyewitnesses put it, killing a strong devil with his bare hands just outside the city. Care to explain? Makima smiled. It's as you read it. I found someone promising. Someone I'm sure will aid humanity in their fight against the devils. Is that so? Asked the man. Another dog for the machine? Her eyes glinted. More like, a puppy. An innocent puppy. Just waiting to be molded, to be turned into a weapon of mass destruction. Her weapon of mass destruction. Well, I trust your judgment on the matter, the soft-spoken man said. You're dismissed, Makima. She nodded once, turning to leave. Okabadera Hospital. The spider lowered itself from above, suspended by a single, thin web. So small, yet so powerful, this creature had inspired fear in humans for thousands of years, bringing about her existence. Prinz reached out a hand and let the spider land on her finger. The arachnid, feeling a sense of safety in her grasp, crawled along her skin without a second thought, or an instinctual urge to scamper away. She smiled, the tiniest twitch of her lips. A smile so small it didn't seem like one, for her features were forever frozen in an expression of nonchalance. The zipper-like attribute that descended the middle of her face only added to this aloofness, providing her with an odd, slightly unnerving, visage. In a rare moment of contemplation, Prinz wondered what made humans fear spiders so much. Was it the legs? The fangs? The venom? Truly, few of them were actually venomous. Thousands of species across the globe, but most were harmless. Yet, the anxiety centered around spiders was the sole reason she was alive. She was the spider devil, given life by humanity's collective fear of these peculiar arachnids. It made little sense to her, but she didn't dwell on such thoughts, choosing instead to see the world as it was, in black and white. Prinz was a simple devil. She didn't need much, didn't want much, didn't even speak much. Truth be told, she didn't really know what she wanted, but here she was, watching over Makima's newest pawn. The young man was asleep, in a coma, more precisely. Gone were his old clothes. They were replaced by a hospital gown. His blonde hair was bright and beautiful. His face was strong and handsome, marked by strange whiskers along his cheeks. His expression was peaceful, a direct contrast to the horrible wound that defined his chest. It was bad. Though now covered with bandages, the hole was deep, so deep, in fact, that Prinz had wondered how he was still alive. He was human. But his resilience was like that of a devil. Black, horrible veins and arteries spread out from the bandaged wound, clustering around the hole in his chest. The veins pulsed heavily, almost as if wanting to spread and destroy the rest of his body at a cellular level. But the young man was strong. He fought back against the corruption. Somehow, he kept the black veins from spreading any further. Every ounce of energy he possessed was focused on healing that peculiar injury. She could feel it. That energy. There was a warmth in the air. It felt like water flowing around her, emanating from the sleeping blonde. This energy was so palpable, she swore she could see it whipping about the room, a shudder running down her spine. Prinz leaned closer, walking on multiple legs. This felt eerily similar to what had set the skies ablaze 3 days ago. She leaned even closer, suddenly drawn to his motionless body. Could he be responsi? The hospital room's door opened. Prinz flinched back, returning to her position among the shadows. Makima walked in with a doctor, and Prinz sank into the walls, disappearing from view. The red-haired woman glanced her way, knowing Prinz was present, but the human doctor couldn't see her, even though it was afternoon. The two talked for a time, discussing the young man's prognosis. Makima listened intently, glancing at the blonde every so often. We don't know what the problem is. We've ran multiple tests, drawn blood, collected cultures. The doctor frowned. She was a short middle-aged woman with glasses and graying hair. There's no sign of infection. Yet that wound refuses to begin the healing process. See those black arteries and veins? I've never seen anything like it. Makima crossed her arms. How about surgery? We considered it. She paused, finding the words. You might not believe this, but every time I placed a surgical instrument inside the wound, be it steel or iron, the tool would crumble into dust. She glanced at Naruto. Perhaps it's the work of a devil, the doctor suggested. That's more your domain, so I have little knowledge on the subject. Makima nodded once. She strolled around to where Naruto slept, running her knuckle along his whiskered cheeks. Thank you, Dr. Aiya, Makima stated, eyes fixed on the sleeping young man. I'll take it from here. Aiya, straightening her glasses, looked on curiously. What will you do? Wait. She titled her head. Wait. Makima crossed her arms, a look of complete assurance on her face. In time, he will awake. That, I'm sure of. She glanced at the corner of the hospital room, where Prinz was. I'll be taking him to my home. But I'm not sure that's a good idea, Aiya ventured, sweat pooling at her brow. He's not stable. Not yet, at least. If you wait a couple more days, maybe. Will you be quiet? Aiya's mouth snapped shut, eyes lowering. Sorry, good girl. Makima smiled pleasantly. Now, listen. You will discharge him today. Write up a report concerning his prognosis. Hand over guardianship to me. And keep quiet about your findings. In fact, remove all documentation about his injury from the hospital's medical health record. I want everything wiped clean. Is that understood? Aiya nodded, obeying her without question. Yes, of course, Miss Makima, Aiya intoned. She exited a moment later, which left Makima and Prinz alone. The spider devil emerged from the wall, almost as though it was made of liquid. Lady Makima? Makima retracted her hand from Naruto's face, turning. Take him to my home, Prinz, she instructed. Watch over him until I get there. Let no one see you. As you wish. Prinz dipped her head, scooped Naruto up gently. In her arms, he looked so peaceful, so calm. She wondered if he would be just as calm if he were awake, if he saw her multiple legs and the eerie zipper etched into her face. He'd probably look at her with disgust. Shaking those thoughts from her mind, Prinz also grabbed the IV pole. He was attached to intravenous fluids, whereby he received nutrition, despite his comatose state. Then she sank into the ground, taking him with her, until she disappeared from sight. The last thing she saw was Makima walking to a window, hands clasped behind her back, like a leader, like a ruler, no doubt planning the actions she would soon take. That's who she was. Always looking to the future. Always one step ahead of everyone. TDOE Makima arrived at nightfall. Today was the most exhausting one yet. No doubt due to a rise in devil sightings across Tokyo. She'd spent several hours coordinating the activity of many teams as they patrolled the streets. She'd also oriented new devil hunters, giving them lectures on ways to handle dangerous, life-threatening situations. She took an elevator to the 3rd floor. Then, she entered one of her rooms, a large suite connected to the 2nd floor. There, her dogs waited to greet her. All of them barked loudly, leaping at her as she made her way through the door. Makima laughed. Genuinely laughed, a giggle escaping her lips. The dogs covered her in loving licks, circling her and barking with glee. She reached down and petted each one of them, running her hands through their fur. She let them play for a time, let them lick and hop and bark. "All right," she said gently, "that's enough. Sit, all of you." They obeyed. Sat without so much as a whine. Though their tails wagged excitedly through the air, they listened to her command. "Now, back to your room." All of them stood, movements synchronized, before they returned to where they came from. Makima walked into her luxurious apartment. On the walls were paintings, famous, beautiful paintings that always caught her gaze when she entered each room. She passed a small library. It was filled with books, filled with collections of knowledge that had stood the test of time. Over 300 texts were here, and she'd read each one, always hungry for information about the world, about reality, about existence. Makima stopped by the kitchen and dropped off groceries she'd bought on the way home, before she went to the bathroom. She stripped off her clothes and entered the shower, washing away the sweat of today. She let the warm water hit her skin, let herself relax amid all the responsibilities she had begun accumulating. Once finished, she stepped out of the bath, stopping by a lengthy mirror. Makima paused. She rarely looked at herself, rarely took a moment to observe her physical form. She was older. An adult, by human standards. She shrugged, deeming her age unimportant. Her soaking red hair framed a face that most considered beautiful. Though, honestly, she couldn't quite see the appeal her current body held. If one thing was constant, though, it would be her eyes. She didn't remember all her past lives, both in hell, or on earth. But only these eyes remained. Makima dried herself, moisturized, and put on a simple long-sleeve white shirt and gray shorts. Then she went to see Naruto. He was in one of her spare rooms. Prinz was here, standing over the blonde with both hands clasped in front of her. Lady Makima, the spider devil greeted. "Welcome." Makima nodded once. She approached the bed where Naruto laid, his eyes closed, face peaceful. She studied his features, mapping its uniqueness with a sharp gaze. "Any progress?" "None," Prinz answered. "He's been like this since I arrived." She shifted uncomfortably, the faintest of blushes tinting her cheeks. I bathed him as well. Humans do that sort of thing daily, don't they?" Makima's eyes glinted with amusement. "Yes. I also provided spare clothes, in the event that he wakes." "Good work, Prinz," Makima praised. "You may go." "Of course, Lady Makima." Like before, Prinz phased into the ground, sinking beneath as though it were water. She was gone, then, leaving Makima alone with him. She sat at the edge of the bed. It was silent. Even her dogs remained quiet in the other room. "I saved you for a reason," Makima whispered coldly. "I know this injury won't kill you." Her amber gaze glowed possessively. "You are mine, Naruto. Mine to use. To mold. Don't disappoint me by dying. There's so much to accomplish in this world." Silence. Then a sound. She glanced his way. Naruto was speaking. Saying something. She leaned closer. "I'm sorry, Neji," he murmured. "I'm so sorry." "Neji?" Naruto was trembling, shaking. His features contorted into a pained expression. He flinched in his comatose state, caught within a nightmare, or was it a memory? Makima reached out to hold him steady, to stop his trashing. His wound was bandaged. but the black veins still spread across his chest. What kind of injury was this? He was responding to her touch, though. His shuddering slowed, his breathing becoming more even. But it wasn't enough. There was a sudden bout of convulsions, his teeth gritted as pain racked his body. Without hesitation, Makima joined him in bed. It wasn't planned, or thought out. Just what she thought was necessary to secure him for her future plans. Like yesterday, she wrapped her arms around him as they laid on the mattress. She held him tightly and weathered the storm, his body warm against hers, his breath soft against her neck. In time, Naruto's breathing slowed. He stopped shaking. And somehow, someway, recognizing the presence of another person, his arms snaked around her as well, around her hips. In his comatose state, his subconscious needs rose to the surface. His need for closeness, for safety. Their legs were a tangled mess in the sheets. His head came to rest just above her bosom, golden locks tickling her chin. Huh. There it was again. That sensation. That strange feeling in her chest. Makima stayed there, mentally distant, yet intrigued. Being held. Why did this feel so pleasant? Clinically, experimentally, she chose not move. She chose not to back away from the strange feeling in her chest. Makima held him, and he held her, and they stayed like this for hours. In the end, he didn't make a sound for the rest of the night. She fell asleep, too, much quicker than she ever thought possible. The defect of equality. There were many faces here, dozens of them. A young woman with glistening pink hair. An older man with silver white hair. A young man with dark hair and equally dark eyes, always frowning and brooding to himself. These were just a few of them. They plagued his dreams without end, scenes of their haggard, battle-worn features playing over and over and over again. There was also a village, a host of buildings, and a monument to 5 individuals carved into stone. It was beautiful. The images came and went. Each one was more confusing than the last. There was a giant fox with 9 tails, its powerful appendages whipping about in a frenzy, kicking up dust and debris, changing the very landscape with a single, mighty roar. What, or better yet, who was this creature? He didn't know. He couldn't remember. Though, familiarity still burned in his mind like the hottest flame. That was the worst part, really. Not knowing. Not being able to fit all the pieces of the messy, scattered puzzle that was his mind. There was also pain here. Real, tangible, physical pain. He could feel his body. He could feel the agony all around him, centered in his chest. It felt like days had passed, days of pure pain and sorrow. Until, suddenly, he hurt no longer. That pain in chest was burned away, vaporized by the energy bubbling in his stomach. Finally, relief. Naruto awoke slowly, eyes fluttering open to something bright and powerful. The sun it shined from a grand window, piercing his retinas without mercy. He blinked away the sudden light, and just like that time in the rain, he remained still, taking in the sensation of life. Unlike before, however, he wasn't in pain, nor was he soaked to the bone. He was dry and warm and comfortable. He was on a bed, too. It was nice, it felt nice. He didn't want to do anything but lay here in the silence, listening to the soft breathing of the person in his arms. Makima. He'd noticed her the moment he opened his eyes, or perhaps even earlier, in his dreams, where the touch of another person had calmed the raging storm that was his mind. After a moment, he glanced down. She was still sleeping. Her red hair fell messily over a beautiful, angular face. Her eyes were closed, and she looked so peaceful, so comfortable here with him. She was the 3rd person he'd met, the one who caught him as he plummeted from the sky. He didn't know how, but she had spotted him among dark clouds and pouring rain. Not to mention, Makima did this when she had no reason to. Because honestly, who was he, but a random person that happened to be near death? Yet she saved him. Just like Eri and Yuta had. He glanced at Makima, a sudden happy grin spreading across his features. She must be a good person, he thought. Slowly, tenderly, he untangled himself from her grasp, careful not to wake her. He rolled out of the bed, accidentally tearing out the IV connected to his arm. He panicked as blood welled on his skin, but moments later, the wound closed and the scarlet flow stopped. The minor injury was stitched up in seconds, leaving nothing but the outline of a small scab. So, I heal really fast, he concluded, surprised. Seeing no harm done, Naruto explored the room. It was relatively empty, devoid of decorations or personal artifacts. Must be a place Makima rarely uses, he thought. Next, he stumbled into another room, one with a toilet, sink, and large bathtub. Instinctively, Naruto knew what these devices were. In the back of his mind, he understood that he ought to brush and shower. So, he did, cleaning his teeth and body by muscle memory alone. The shower had been tricky at first, what with all the knobs and pulleys, but he eventually got it to work, enjoying the warm water as it cascaded over his naked flesh. Once finished, he grabbed a towel and gazed at himself in the mirror. Tan skin and spiky blonde hair greeted him. He leaned closer, memorizing the subtleties of his face with intrigue. His eyes were a deep blue. His cheeks were etched with strange whiskers, 3 on either side. He reached up to feel them, running fingers along the slight indentations each mark made in his flesh. Naruto looked at the rest of his body, brows rising, surprised. He was quite fit, quite athletic. Bumps and curves of hard muscle lined his physique, earned only through years of training, years he could no longer remember. The last thing he observed was the injury that defined his chest. Carefully, he peeled off the wet bandages wrapped around his torso. Naruto grimaced. While all the gashes and bruises were gone, the wound on his chest was now a scar. What happened to me? Thankfully, the wound was closed. It didn't hurt as badly anymore, either. Only a subtle throb pulsed up his neck. They were faint, but black blood vessels ran from his injury to his collarbone, up his throat, and to parts of his face and skull. Was this the reason he couldn't remember? Had these black, poison-filled veins reached so far into him that they damaged his brain? Naruto didn't know. And by the looks of things, even those veins were starting to fade, healing. But the damage had already been done. A sudden throb of pain lanced through his skull. Naruto flinched, closing one eye as the image of a white-haired woman blurred to life. She had horns and a crimson eyeball on her forehead. She shot something from her hand, a spear of bone that sailed through the air, headed for a young man with black hair. The vision faded, reality bleeding back together again. Naruto panted, eyes wide, chest aching. He shook his head. He didn't want to think about such things right now. It was too much, too traumatizing. So, he put that image out of his mind, dried himself with a towel, and looked through a closet in the bathroom. Surprisingly, he found something to wear, something that suited him well enough. Black form-fitting pants and a royal blue shirt. He put them on and made his way back to the room. Good morning. Her smooth, gentle voice reached his ears. Makima was awake, seated at the edge of the bed with a single leg crossed. She smiled, amber eyes locking with his own. Lost in those mysterious orbs of hers, it took a moment for him to process her words. He rubbed his hair sheepishly. He returned her smile, shyly at first. Hi, Makima. Come. Sit. She patted a spot next to her. He hesitated. It's okay. Come on, Naruto. You can trust me, remember? Finally, he moved and sat beside her, body sinking into the soft mattress. He remained silent for a time, staring ahead. He didn't know what to say, didn't know what to think. The world felt so alien to him, yet so familiar at the same time. It was strange. For instance, Naruto knew he was male, and that Makima was female. He knew what the sun was, what clouds were, what rain was. He knew how to shower and wear his clothes. He knew they were in a building, that they were on a bed. Naruto understood these basic, intrinsic things, but he couldn't comprehend the past, his past. He didn't know where his story started, and where it was now, or how he came to be in a forest, injured and dying in the pouring rain. You really, truly don't remember who you are, do you? Makima finally spoke. She glanced his way. Her eyes seemed to peer into his soul. I don't. He frowned, still frustrated by the reality of it all. I'm sorry. This must be hard, she said tenderly. No one deserves to go through something like this. Naruto looked to her. Then, you believe me? Yes. Why? He questioned skeptically. For all you know, I could be lying to you, using you to gain something. She chuckled. Trust me, I'm not so easily controlled. Also, I believe you're genuinely telling the truth. Makima glanced out the window. You don't seem like the type of person to lie. Naruto considered her words. How can you be so sure? I don't even know what type of person I am. Of course you do, Makima whispered soothingly. Amnesia is a tricky thing, Naruto. There are many types, some caused by traumatic injuries, others by degradation of the brain. I'm not sure what is causing your particular situation, but I do know that your personality, who you are, survived whatever trauma you experienced. He remained silent, and she continued. You saved those 2 civilians, despite your injured state. You didn't give up. You pushed through the pain and put yourself between them and that devil. Makima took his hand, squeezing tightly. Others would have accepted their fate, would have laid down and died. But you didn't. You're a fighter. You take action. You're someone who isn't passive. She looked up at him. That's who you are, and we need more people like you in this world. Her words struck him like a bolt of lightning. Naruto sat there, let them sink in. He might not remember the past, but some part of him still survived. The part that was willing to help others in need. The part that was willing to be thankful and appreciate those that deserved it. Makima was right. He was a fighter. As such, he would fight through whatever was happening to him. Naruto squeezed her hand back. Thank you, Makima. I needed to hear that. A pleased look flashed in her eyes. I'm glad I could help. An instant of silence slipped by. So, what now? He inquired. She rubbed her chin in thought. What now, huh? Makima smirked. How about we go out for breakfast? Naruto arched a brow, but his stomach rumbled as if on K. He rubbed his hair sheepishly. I guess I haven't eaten in, 3 days? Precisely, Makima confirmed, standing up. I'll be taking a week off of work, so we can spend as much time as we need to help you integrate into society. You're already familiar with many basic things, but you'll find that the world can be a bit harsh at times. Naruto remembered the creature he fought and killed the other day. You mean devils, right? The redhead nodded. Naruto looked at his hands, no longer stained with the blood of that vulture. But he could still recall the feeling as he sliced its throat, as he cut its head away from its body. I took its life so easily, without remorse, he admitted. Did I do the right thing? Makima was looking at him strangely, in a way he could only describe as sheer fascination. You protected 2 innocent people, she answered definitively. You have no reason to regret what you did. I guess you're right, Naruto replied, laughing softly. Still, even devils have feelings, right? They're alive, like me. They must have a reason for doing what they do. Maybe not all of them are bad. She remained silent, then said, perhaps. But I agree, he continued. If one tries to hurt an innocent person, I'm sure I wouldn't hesitate to fight them. Good. Makima clasped her hands behind her back. You'll make a fine devil hunter. Before he could ask what being a devil hunter entailed, besides the obvious name, Makima was already leaving the room, humming a little tune to herself. Naruto sighed, leaning back on the bed, where he stared at the ceiling. If he were honest with himself, he'd admit that he was scared. The future was uncertain as his past. The world seemed so huge and confusing and intricate, even without the existence of these devils. Coupled with such creatures, the complexities of life were multiplied tenfold. Were all devils bad? Did they all look monstrous? Did they have dreams and fears? And what about him? What was he? He had, for a split second, manipulated water and wind. He'd also punched a devil through multiple trees while Eri and Yuta had been powerless against the creature. Naruto groaned. I'm so confused, he lamented lightheartedly. At least Makima was here to help him, to guide him. Naruto stiffened on the bed, feeling a sudden wetness at his feet. What the? Something was licking him, sniffing about. He quickly sat up and was greeted by the sight of a creature. No, a dog, with snow-white fur and piercing green eyes. The hound sat on its haunches and stared at him, panting excitedly. There was a certain spark, a genuine curiosity in its vibrant gaze, head leaning forward happily. Oh, hey there, he said with a grin. Who are you? Naruto ran his hands through silky fur, earning an approving bark from the dog. It nuzzled into his palm and blinked joyously. Then the canine leapt forward and landed on his chest, licking him without respite. And Naruto laughed, just laughed, unwilling to push his new canine friend away as he was covered in happy, innocent licks. Side by side, they walked down a street in Shibuya. It wasn't too busy, and a moderate number of pedestrians moved along the sidewalks. Naruto's eyes were wide. There were so many different types of people. Some short, some tall. Some old, some young. Men and women of all sizes went about their day. Cars and motorcycles darted by, and the world was filled with a kind of noise he could not describe. The sound wasn't unpleasant. Quite the opposite, actually. He found it soothing, the definition of unyielding human activity. The buildings were very tall, too. Very sturdy and well designed. Naruto couldn't help but look at each of them, especially the ones that towered into the morning sky, reaching so far they seemed to touch the shining sun. The ban on travel was lifted yesterday, and the curfew rescinded, Makima noted. She was beside him. Her hair was done in a single, braided ponytail, with red bangs framing either side of her face. She was dressed as casually as he was, outfit consisting of an olive blouse and form-fitting blue jeans. She had a small leather purse strewn around her shoulder as they walked. So, there's a lot more people out, a lot more than I thought there'd be. He nodded as she spoke. Makima also explained to him who the soldiers with guns were, stating that they were Defense Force soldiers sent by the Prime Minister to keep the peace. But now that the situation surrounding 3 days ago was better, most of them were leaving the city. And those are devil hunters, Makima pointed out. We typically work in uniform, so most of the time, you'll see us wearing a suit and tie. Many of them worked in pairs, in a buddy system of sorts. Naruto watched them, wondering if they had any special abilities. Like him. Or like Makima. From the moment they met, he knew she was different. After all, she'd been floating, flying, when she saved him. A golden, glowing chain had also protruded from her stomach as well, disappearing only after she'd landed. Makima took him to a little restaurant with outdoor seating. It was a nice place, filled with chatting people and the smell of delicious food. What would you like to eat? She asked, tilting her head slightly. He looked over the menu, humming thoughtfully. And don't worry. I'll cover the cost of anything you eat, Makima added kindly. He thanked her, eyes scanning the menu until it landed on something he instantly recognized. Just seeing the words brought about a rush of smells, tastes, and wonderful feelings that left him bittersweet. Ramen, he blurted out, louder than he should have. I'll have the miso ramen, extra pork. Very well. Makima helped order their meals, and for some reason, she chose the same thing he was having. They ate together outside, just enjoying the gentle wind as it blew through the city. Naruto finished first, slurping up his noodles with such enthusiasm that it seemed as though he'd inhale the bowl too. Makima ate slower, savoring the food with a thoughtful expression. I can't say I've had this flavor before, she commented. It's not bad. In the end, she ordered 2 more bowls for him and paid without question. Naruto made a mental note to do the same for her one day. So, you're a devil hunter, Naruto remarked, taking a sip of his soda. What exactly do you guys do? Makima leaned back in her chair. We primarily kill, or capture, devils, she explained nonchalantly. Then most devils are dangerous, Naruto mused. For the most part, yes, she answered. That should always be your first assumption when coming into contact with one. Though, typically, devils that have a more human appearance are either friendly or, at the very least, unconcerned with humans. Less harmful, in a way. Naruto nodded slowly. And these devils, they hurt people regularly? All the time, said Makima. Imagine a room of 100 people. Now, out of those 100, 35 of them will be killed by a devil, not even mentioning injuries those surviving 65 might sustain. 35% of people, Naruto. It's a serious public health crisis. Not only here in Japan, but in the entire world as well. Huh. Naruto let the words sink in. He recalled Eri and Yuta, recalled the creature that would have eaten them alive, painfully and slowly. If he hadn't been there, they wouldn't be alive today. They wouldn't have stood a chance. Makima clasped her hands on the table, leaning her chin against her fingers. That's why we need powerful people, people strong enough, brave enough, to become devil hunters. He met her gaze head on. You think I should become one? Makima's eyes glinted. Yes, precisely. Why? She smirked. Do I really need to explain why? Naruto shrugged, grinning. Because of my powers? That's part of it, Makima admitted. But it's also because you had no fear when you faced down that devil. She leaned forward. I interviewed those 2, you know. Eri and Yuta. And they told me you fought without hesitation to protect them. They consider you their hero. They do. A blush tinted his cheeks. And no, they saved me too. If anything, I should be grateful to them. The point still stands, Makima continued. You're the kind of person we need at public safety. An anomaly. Someone to turn the tide in humanity's war against devils. She had a point. He couldn't argue with her logic. If he was as special as she'd made him out to be, perhaps he could do some good here, help people, like he did for Eri and Yuta. What else would he be doing, anyway? He had no memories of the past, no responsibilities, no friends, no job. He had nothing. Maybe the best thing for him to do would be finding a purpose, occupying his time, using his abilities to help those who couldn't help themselves. At least, until he understood more about himself, about the world. Naruto looked up at her, this strange, mysterious, and deeply persuasive woman. Never mind him. Who was Makima? He wondered. There was something about her, in the way she held herself, her poise, her composure, that was completely different from those around her. Oh. Good morning, Miss Makima. A sudden, unfamiliar voice. Naruto turned to his left. Sasuke? That name left his mouth before he could stop it. The new arrival, a black-haired young man, arched his brow. Sasuke? Who the hell's that? Naruto frowned to himself, shaking his head. Sorry, you just look familiar. Like someone he used to know. Hayakawa, Himeno, Makima greeted. Good morning, you two. What a pleasant surprise. You're out on patrol, I presume? Yeah, Hayakawa answered. Naruto eyed him curiously. He was tall, pale, with blue eyes. His dark hair was pulled up into a top-knot bun. He was dressed in a suit and tie, as most devil hunters were. And strapped behind his back was a single sword, sheathed, yet ready to be drawn at a moment's notice. Naruto squinted. Something about his face, his mannerisms, were familiar to him. It's been really busy today, especially now that more people are outside, he continued. I can tell. Makima nodded. Don't push yourself too hard. We can't have one of our best agents burning out. I won't, Hayakawa said, cheeks flushing. His companion, the woman beside him, seemed to bristle, biting her lips as she looked at Makima, then at her partner. Naruto glanced her way. She had an eye patch, leaving only one emerald eye exposed. She was quite beautiful, he mused, medium-length dark hair fluttering against a sudden gale. Who's this cutie, huh? Himeno interrupted them, smirking. Is he your boyfriend? Hayakawa stiffened, turning to face him once more. He looked Naruto up and down, appraising him with a curious, somewhat jealous, gaze. Makima waved her off, smiling. No, he's just a friend. Friend, teased Himeno. She leaned closer, placing her hands against the table. She angled herself in such a way that her, admittedly, ample bosom was even more pronounced. Her breath smelled of mint, and she had no qualms against openly flirting with him. Maybe I'd like you to be my friend as well. Say, what's your name, handsome? Naruto, he answered evenly. While she was certainly an attractive lady, Naruto was able to control himself, able to keep his composure as he met her single eye. And you're Himeno, one of Makima's colleagues. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you too, Naruto. Himeno took his hand in hers and kissed his knuckle gently, teasingly. He didn't flinch or pull back. It was likely that he'd had enough experiences with women before he lost his memory, judging by his ability to keep calm. Removing her lips from his hand, Himeno looked over at Makima, as if expecting to get a rise out of her. Makima only stared forward, not reacting. Oh, you're no fun, Himeno remarked, frowning. She pulled back, turned to him. She trying to recruit you into public safety? Naruto shrugged. Maybe. Want my advice? Himeno asked. Don't join. It ain't worth it. For the first time, Makima frowned. It was small, a gentle downward curling of the lips. Stop it. Hayakawa groaned. Don't try to discourage him. If Miss Makima thinks he has what it takes, I'm sure he'll be fine. I'm only kidding, Aki. Lighten up, Himeno chuckled. Do what you want, Naruto. Don't listen to me, especially when I'm sober. Wasn't planning to, he replied with a grin. Himeno grinned as well. You know, we should go drinking sometime. My treat. Come on, Himeno. Stop flirting. Aki took her by the arm. We still have to get to Shinjuku by noon. Fine, Himeno conceded. If you do end up joining public safety, let me take you out after your first mission. She winked with her single eye. I'll see you around, Whiskers. Naruto arched his brow with a tiny smile. Whiskers? Despite her knack for invading his personal space, he actually kind of liked Himeno. She had a certain spark to her. A playful personality he couldn't help but be drawn to. Maybe they could be friends. Take care, Miss Makima, Aki said. He glanced at Naruto, something unreadable in his gaze. And you as well, Naruto. The pair departed, Himeno waving as they moved further along the street. Makima took a sip of her coffee. Did you enjoy the meal? Naruto nodded. I did. The smile on his face hadn't left. I wouldn't mind having such good food every day. I'm sure you will, she replied. Naruto rubbed at his hair. About joining public safety, I think. Makima stood. Hold that thought. You don't have to decide right now. She took his hand and helped him stand. Also, our ride is here. A black car soon parked beside the restaurant. The driver was an older man in a suit, another devil hunter. He greeted both of them and unlocked the door. Where are we going? Naruto queried. Makima opened the door for him, letting him through first. Outside of the city. I want to show you something. Smiley face. Smiley face. She held a box in her lap. The windows were down, and the cool, turbulent air pushed against her face. They had music playing. Naruto listened intently to the lyrics of each song, nodding along to every new band or artist as they sang and performed. She'd even started tapping her feet to the tempo of the current song. Its tune was soft, yet energetic, matching the mood Naruto created when around others. He also talked to their driver, asked him many questions. Some were simple, some were complex. Makima leaned back, eyes distant as she stared out the window. Naruto was ever curious, ever ready to explore any idea presented to him. There was pain in his eyes, though, almost as if he was silently mourning the loss of a life he used to live, a life he could no longer remember. Even she couldn't pierce the veil that was his psyche. When Makima gazed into his mind, she was greeted by darkness. By fractured memories. And a monster. It was a fox with 9 flowing tails and an aura of unspeakable, unfathomable power. What was this creature? A devil. Contained inside Naruto. She reached out, moved forward, not another step, woman. Its voice shook the void, rippling the water beneath her feet. The beast roared, and Makima's body was torn apart, shredded to pieces, as she was flung from Naruto's mind, back into the real world, flinching with genuine surprise. Are you okay? Naruto asked tenderly. Makima regained her composure instantly. Yes. She noticed them slowing down. I think we're here. They were. The car stopped in a forested area. A small abandoned house stood starkly against fields of green. There was a hill ahead. It was distant, at least a few minutes walking at a steady pace. They exited the vehicle. Makima said to the driver, "Stay here until we return." Both of them walked through a land of flowers. Makima held the box in her hand, feeling the contents shaking as she moved. As instructed, Prince had placed it in the car earlier, wrapping the box in a surprisingly beautiful way. Naruto looked around fondly, a love of nature evident in his expression. Once far enough from the car, they paused. Naruto marveled. Look at that. Beautiful, isn't? Makima asked smoothly. Yeah. The city was laid out before them, like some map given life by a divine painter. It was a mixture of nature and human ingenuity, and her companion stared ahead with awe in his eyes. You know, I saw the city when I fell from the sky, Naruto began. It was dark though. I couldn't see everything. But now I can see it. Millions of people live here. He frowned. And 35% of them will be killed by a devil in their lifetime. His words hung in the air, some forgotten part of himself clawing to the surface, a part that longed for peace. Makima's eyes narrowed. She turned to him. Naruto, she stated bluntly. Show me your power. That's an order. Silence. Naruto stared at her, utterly confused by her tone. Wait, what? Ah. So, I can't control him, Makima mused. Because he was powerful, stronger than most. As the controlled devil, she had the ability to manipulate those she deemed weaker than herself. But Naruto wasn't weaker than her, was he? Despite being a shell of the man she'd witnessed battling above the clouds, in the depths of her heart, Makima understood that he was superior to her. Not many beings were. Darkness was. Death was. The hero of hell was. And a few others primordials were. Now, someone else had been added to that short list. Very well. In that case, if she couldn't control him by force, if she couldn't make him form a contract with her, then cunning schemes would be the key. She glanced at the box in her arms. Makima laughed. I'm only kidding, she said brightly, tone shifting. I was just trying to shock you into controlling the wind again. He looked at her for a moment. The trust he had in her still remained, despite her miscalculated blunder. Naruto gazed at his palms. I can't manipulate the wind at will yet. It was something that happened in the heat of the moment. She placed a hand on his shoulder. Sorry. What I asked was uncalled for. Don't force yourself to do something when you have no reason to. He nodded slowly, continued to look at the city in all its glory. I have something for you, Makima said after a moment. Naruto glanced her way. I was wondering what you had in the box. Here. Open it. She handed it over. Naruto took the container, curiosity creasing his visage. With gentle hands, he opened the cardboard box. Tears suddenly brimmed in his eyes. Makima smiled to herself, pleased by his reaction. It was a headband. There was metal attached to it, as well as a leaf-shaped symbol carved into its glinting surface. The steel plate was battered, damaged, worn out by time and countless battles. I found this near the place you killed that devil, Makima explained. It had had his scent on it, too. So she figured it must be important to him, even if he didn't remember the reason. Naruto grinned and tears streamed down his face. He gripped the headband tightly, overcome with a rush of emotions. I don't know why, he spoke softly, but I think you found something very important to me. He gazed at her with such happiness, such fondness. Thank you, Makima. Don't worry about it. Naruto laughed happily and picked her up, literally lifted her off the ground. He spun her around as her stomach lurched with surprise. 3 twirls. Then he hugged her, pulled her into him, as he'd done when they first met, as they'd done last night on one of her beds. She'd never been embraced so much in a single day. Makima stood there stiffly, frozen in his arms. Eventually, she returned his hug, only to play the part of deceiving him, of making him trust and rely on her to such a degree that he would do anything she said, even without her control ability. Yes, that was it. She was only hugging him in order to carve that path toward a future where he destroyed her enemies with reckless abandon. Yeah, she thought, closing her eyes as they held each other under the midday sun, this is all according to plan.